Hello and welcome to Owning the Narrative. I am Bulow. The show will feature the top news of the week, complete with my observations, and even a little bit of sarcasm thrown in. The top news stories will be taken from my morning news briefings that I write on the Rick Bulow New Media blog every weekday morning. If you go on to like what you see, smash that thumbs up button. And now, let's go right into the news. 64 days until the election. And with the conventions out of the way, things are really starting to ramp up. This from NBCnews.com. And it's entitled, It's Biden's to Lose, Post-Convention State of the Presidential Race. This by Alex Seitzwald. The election is Joe Biden's to lose as he continues to hold a lead over President Donald Trump coming out of the Democrat and Republican conventions, which marked the start of the fall campaign. But the future is unknowable. Data has its limits. Surprises happen. The world can change quickly, as anyone who lived through the 2016 election or the first 8 months of 2020 knows. The party remains deeply polarized along a roughly 50-50 partisan split. Biden and Trump allies both agree the outcome will likely be closer than the polls currently suggest, as voters increasingly feel the tug of partisan magnets. Here's what we know, and importantly, what we don't know, 2 months before November 3rd. What the polls say and what they don't. The state of the race is easy to summarize right now. The data says that Biden should win. Now, while it's too early to tell if the convention should change the race, the Real Clear Politics average of polls has Biden up about 7 percentage points nationally and about 3 percentage points, on average, across 6 key battleground states: Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, Florida, North Carolina, and Arizona. Trump has trailed in head-to-head matchups with Biden since pollsters first started measuring it in 2019, and his approval rating has been underwater since almost the first day of his presidency, meaning more people disapprove of him than approve. And Biden's lead is bigger than Hillary Clinton's was at this point in 2016. The Economist statistical forecast model gives Biden a roughly 9-to-1 chance of winning. 538 says Biden winning 69 out of 100 times. The Princeton University Election Consortium projects the former vice president winning 349 electoral votes. He needs 270. And longtime forecaster Alan Abramowitz, using a completely different system, gives Biden a 70% chance. But models are just theories about how the future will play out based on historical data. The theories can be wrong. The data can be useless if this year's election is substantively different from historical ones. No poll or forecast can take into account real-world events, like the course of the coronavirus pandemic over the next 2 months, or a potential health scare from the 2 septuagenarian presidential candidates. The polls pretty much nailed the national popular vote in 2016, but they missed a late swing for Trump in battleground states and underestimated his support from non-college educated whites. While a swing of a few thousand votes can tip a key state, it's usually not enough to register in polls. Patrick Murray, the director of the respected Monmouth University poll, said when friends and family members ask him what will happen in the election, he responds, "My crystal ball is in the shop." But we do know a few things that are different from 2016. Trump is not president and more people's minds are made up. Third-party protest candidates are getting less traction. Biden's lead is bigger than Clinton's, and unlike Clinton, he's ahead with voters who dislike both candidates. Let our news we have far fewer undecided than we did 4 years ago, and a lot less room for movement, Mary said. But there's still enough room to thread the needle, which is exactly what happened 4 years ago so you can't discount any outcome. The ways Trump can win. Unlike 2016, no one doubts Trump could win this year. The president could persuade suburban voters who defected during the 2018 midterms that the Democrats are too dangerous. He could bring in new voters among the white working class, which make up a majority of the Americans, who do not generally vote in key states. Voters still trust Trump more on the economy, and they may conclude he's better equipped to lead the economy. The convention was designed to give upper middle class voters permission to support the president, said Dan Eberhardt, a major conservative donor and Trump ally. The message was that the Trump administration is inclusive and is addressing the concerns of minorities and immigrants. Those testimonials were aimed at those undecided voters who may not like Trump's personality, but don't like the policies of the left. As long as Democrats continue to ignore the concerns of half the country, they're going to have trouble winning national elections, he added. Trump now commands the mighty powers of the presidency and is not afraid to use them for his personal political gain, regardless of the law. He pardoned Alice Johnson, who spoke at the GOP convention the day after the RNC ended. He could try to push a vaccine to market before it is fully tested, or do something much darker. Most analysts agree that the Electoral College gives Trump an edge, since it proves an advantage to smaller states, which tend to be redder states over big ones. After all, 2.8 million more Americans voted for Clinton than Trump in 2016, but he still won the presidency thanks to the Electoral College. He could do that again. Defining issues, the pandemic and an ensuing recession have become one intertwined and all-encompassing crisis, swallowing everything from the economy to schooling, sports, healthcare, and racial injustice. Republicans attempted to put the coronavirus and its job-killing impact on the economy in the rearview mirror during their convention, but voters overwhelmingly disapprove of how Trump has handled the crisis and have dim views about the trajectory of the country and the economy. There was a certain element of denying the undeniable in the treatment of the pandemic. Wet errors, a top Republican pollster said of the GOP convention. But at this point, the pandemic and the president's leadership were overwhelmingly top of mind for most voters. Could a vaccine arrive earlier? Does the number of cases come down? Does the economy rebound despite the virus? Can Trump successfully rewrite history and convince enough Americans he did everything right to control the virus and that it's no longer a threat? Meanwhile, Trump has made clear that he wants to focus on law and order and tie Biden into the riots and looting that have broken out during some protests demanding racial justice. In Wisconsin, a critical state, positive views of the Black Lives Matter movement fell significantly between June and August, while positive views of the police ticked up. In June, 59% of Wisconsin registered voters had a favorable view of Black Lives Matter, while 20% had an unfavorable view, according to a Marquette Law School poll of the state. The August survey, which was conducted before the Kenosha unrest, found support notched down to 49%, while disapproval went up by 37%, with significant movement among white independents. Now, while it's not yet clear how views on Black Lives Matter influence the voters' feelings toward Biden, it is the only other issue getting much attention during the pandemic. Increasingly widespread violence in our cities that Democrats fail to condemn vociferously enough and fail to quash has become has the potential to upend the race, which up to this point has been remarkably stable, Ayers said. Cash is king. Money isn't everything, but it helps candidates to get their message out and to find their opponent, especially when it's difficult to campaign in person. Now, Trump has been raising money for his campaign since his last one and has broken several records. His campaign has outraised Biden by almost $100 million, $415 million to $321 million as of the end of July. But the Democrats are catching up with a huge flood of cash in recent months that is only expected to increase, raising over $70 million during the Democrat convention and $48 million around Kamala Harris' selection as vice president. And outside groups have also been helping narrow the gap, spending $148 million on behalf of Biden to the $90 million spent on behalf of Trump, according to Open Secrets. Democrats are nothing if not an anxious bunch, and the 2016 election left such a mental scar that many are now conditioned to assume they'll somehow blow it again and snatch defeat from the jaws of victory. We absolutely must have urgency as we approach this election. Nothing is in the bag, still veering toward, despondent anxiety is unhealthy, said Ian Sams, a veteran of Clinton's and Harris's presidential campaigns. 2020 is not 2016, and Donald Trump now owns his record as president. So what's next? The biggest foreseeable events between now and election day are the presidential debates, which will take place on September 29 in Cleveland, which is, well, now Indianapolis. Now I think it's Notre Dame. Anyway, October 15 in Miami and October 22nd in Nashville, Tennessee. Vice President Mike Pence is also scheduled to debate Harris on October 7 in Salt Lake City. Despite speculation that either Trump or Biden would refuse to debate, both have said they look forward to the debates and are planning to attend. Election day will look very much different this year, with tens of millions of Americans expected to vote early or by mail to avoid crowded polling places during the pandemic. Voting in some key states starts as early as September, and it could take longer to count mail ballots, meaning we may not know the winner on election night. Now, interestingly enough, good article, I will say that. However, the key that the article is missing, and one that I had seen in another article, is the fact that most of the Democrats now are shifting toward Trump. I mean, C-SPAN had in their call-in shows, whether it be Washington Journal or during the conventions, or even during some of the breaks when the House is in session on C-SPAN 1, most of the callers on there are saying that they're fed up with the Democrats' policies and that they're shifting toward Trump. Why? Because of what Trump had done prior to the pandemic. You know, economy down, consumer confidence up, stock market up. I mean, I said this a couple of weeks ago and I'll say it again. During the 1992 election, Bill Clinton won because James Carville had said that it's the economy, stupid. I think, and this is just my opinion right now, August 31, 2020, that the economy is going to play a key role at the election time. Like I say, we're just inside 64 days until the election, so a lot can happen, and I'll be right here talking about it. The president had received a slight bump in the polls post-convention, and there were 4 trends that say that he may have a bigger edge come November. This coming from justthenews.com, and it's by Cheryl Atkinson. 4 little noticed trends that suggest Trump could have an edge in November. The facts inside our reporter's notebook. Almost all recent national polling has showed President Trump consistently behind Joe Biden. According to Real Clear Politics, which uses averages of released polls, Biden remains up in the national polls, battleground states, and even the betting odds. The current electoral count at Real Clear Politics stands at 115 for Trump, 212 for Biden, and 211 toss-ups, with 270 needed to win. Now, do these stats imply a Biden wave on November 3rd? Or are we seeing a repeat of 2016 when almost nobody predicted Trump would or even could win? There are four little trends that worry Biden supporters. Number one, betting odds. Gamblers are giving Biden the edge over Trump, 50.7% to 48.3%. But look at the trend line across. But a look at the trend line shows a large decline for Biden and a comeback from Trump from just 30 days ago. On August 1, the odds were 61% for Biden, 36.4% for Trump. Two, the battleground states. With the exception of North Carolina, which is a virtual tie, the Real Clear Politics average shows Biden ahead in every other key battleground state. When averaged together, Biden is up over Trump 48% to 45.3% in 6 states: Florida, North Carolina, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Arizona. The concern for the Trump camp comes with the concern for the Biden camp rather comes with a comparison to 2016. Although Trump is on the losing end right now, his position is slightly ahead of where he was in the battleground states in 2016. Explained another way, Hillary Clinton was beating Trump more in the battleground states in 2016 than Joe Biden is now, and we know Trump actually won in 2016. So what does the current trend imply other than so does the current trend imply an even larger Trump win? Number three, total approval. Judging by the news coverage and social media, it would be easy to conclude that Trump is one of the most unpopular presidents of all time. However, Rasmussen reports, the only polling organization that publishes Trump job approval ratings on a daily basis, finds the 45th president is not nearly as unpopular as it may seem. His overall approval, or his total approval among likely voters, frequently bests that of President Obama at the same point in his presidency. All of the high marks since April 2018 have been set by Trump, compared to Obama. On September 4, 2019, Trump's total approval hit 53%, compared to Obama's 44% on September 24, 2011. Number four, favorability ratings. For the past year, Biden has, without exception, bested Trump in favorability ratings. Right now, Biden is significantly ahead of Trump by 13.2 points. The concern for the Biden team comes with a comparison to 2016 when Hillary Clinton was, likewise, ahead of Trump every single day, but often by a bigger margin, and Trump won. In the end, and Trump won in the end. Now, Real Clear Politics tracking shows Trump has spent most of the past year in a better position than he was in 2016, signified by red in the graph, which is linked to the tracking Even the most confident pundits appear to be hesitant to predict a firm outcome based on the numbers this time around. It's hard to disagree with one takeaway. With the election a little more than 2 months away, it's still anybody's game. And that is so true. It is still anybody's game. And we've even seen that in an article in Legal Insurrection by Professor William Jacobson, where Michael Moore wins Democrats. Enthusiasm level for the 60 million in Trump's base is off the charts. In 2016, Michael Moore warned liberals at a time when Trump was down in the polls that Trump could win, calling him the human Molotov cocktail the working class has been hoping for. Whether Trump means it or not is kind of irrelevant because he's saying the things to people who are hurting, Moore said. And that's why every beaten down, nameless or forgotten working stiff who used to be part of what was called the middle class loves Trump. He is a human Molotov cocktail that they've been waiting for. The human hand grenade that they can legally throw into the system that stole their lives from them. And on November 8, Election Day, when although they lost their jobs, although they've been foreclosed by the bank, next came the divorce, and now the wife and kids are gone. The cars have been reposed. They haven't had a real vacation in years. They're stuck with the crappy Obamacare bonds plan when you can't even get a blinking Percocet. They've essentially lost everything they have except for one thing. The one thing that doesn't cost them a cent and guaranteed to them by the American Constitution, the right to vote. They might be penniless, they might be homeless, they might be screwed over and, and messed up. It doesn't matter because it's equalized on that day. A millionaire has the same number of votes as a person without a job, one. And there's more of the former middle class than there are in the millionaire class. So on November 8th, the dispossessed will walk into the voting booth, be handed a ballot, close a curtain, and take that lever or felt pen or touchscreen and put a big X in the box of the name of the man who is send a pen and a pen and overturn the very system that has ruined their lives, Donald Trump. They see that the elites who ruin their lives hate Trump. Corporate America hates Trump. Wall Street hates Trump. The career politicians hate Trump. The media hates Trump after they loved him and created him and now hate him. Thank you, media. The enemy of my enemy is who I am voting for on November 8th. Yes, on November 8th, you, Joe Blow, Steve Blow, Bob Blow, Billy Bob Blow, all the blows get to blow up the whole daggone system because it's your right. The Trump election is going to be the biggest blank you've ever recorded in human history, and it will feel good. Now, whatever else you may think of Michael Moore, he was red in 2016. He sensed what the media bubble ignored. Moore has been warning for over a year that Democrats are in control, and there are two articles in 2019. August 1 has Michael Moore, only Michelle Obama can save us from 4 more years of Trump. And on December 29, Michael Moore predicts Trump win in 2020. His level of support has not gone down 1 inch. Moore now is using another warning at a full freakout level on his Facebook page. Emphasis in bold added. Sorry to have to provide the reality check. Check again. But when CNN polled registered voters in August in just the swing states, Biden and Trump are in a virtual tie. In Minnesota, it's 47-47. In Michigan, where Biden had a big lead, Trump has closed the gap to 4 points. Are you ready for a Trump victory? Are you mentally prepared to be outsmarted by Trump again? Do you find comfort in your certainty that there is no way Trump can win? Are you content with the trust you place in the DNC to pull this off? The Biden campaign just announced he'll be visiting a number of states, but not Michigan. Sound familiar? I'm warning you almost 10 weeks in advance. The enthusiasm level for the 60 million in Trump space is off the charts. For Joe, not so much. Don't leave it to the Democrats to get rid of Trump. You have to get rid of Trump. We have to wake up every day for the next 67 days and make sure each of us are going to get people out to vote. Act now. Moore is also taking it to Twitter. So, and it says pretty much the same thing. So I'd have to provide the reality check again. But when they poll registered voters in the swing states, Biden and Trump are in a virtual tie. In Minnesota, it's 47-47. In Michigan, where Biden has a big lead, Trump has closed the gap to 4 points. Are you ready for a Trump victory? Act now. That on August 28th. Check this out. During the same week in August, but 4 years apart, in 2016, Hillary was way ahead of Trump. But this past week, in some swing states, Biden's lead is less than what Hillary's was. You can't blame this one on the PO or Russia. This is on the Canadian party. Wake up. Now, interestingly enough, and I said this many times, I did not vote for Trump in 2016 because I thought Trump and Hillary were pretty much one and the same. However, I am going to pull that lever for Trump this year because the economy pre-pandemic, pre-COVID-19 was at an all-time high, stock market all-time high, unemployment all-time low, like James Carville said when guiding Bill Clinton to win the 92 election, it's the economy stupid. That's what this is. We're just inside 62 days. or rather we're just inside 63 days, sorry about that, from the election. So everything's coming out, and we'll find out what happens come November 3rd. Outside of the presidential campaign, there was a fierce campaign for the Senate seat in Massachusetts. And yesterday saw history in the making in the Massachusetts Senate primary. This from the Associated Press, and the title is Markey Defeats Kennedy III in Massachusetts Senate Primary. U.S. Senator Edward Markey of Massachusetts defeated U.S. Representative Joe Kennedy III in Tuesday's hard-fought Democrat primary, harnessing support from progressive leaders to overcome a challenge from a younger rival who is a member of America's most famous political family. It was the first time a Kennedy has lost a race for Congress in Massachusetts. Markey appealed to voters in the deeply Democrat state by positioning himself as aligned with the liberal wing of the party. He teamed up with the leading progressive New York Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez on the Green New Deal climate change initiative, and at one point labeled Kennedy a progressive in name only. That helped Markey overcome the enduring power of the Kennedy name in Massachusetts. The 39-year-old congressman sought to cast the 74-year-old Markey as someone out of touch after spending decades in Congress, first in the House before moving to the Senate. At a victory celebration in his hometown of Malden, Massachusetts, Markey ticked off a series of priorities from support for the Black Lives Matter movement to a call for Medicare for all to combating climate change, a signature issue for Markey. Every other problem is linked to it. No solution to any challenge will be successful unless we address it. There will be no peace, no justice, and no prosperity unless we stop the march to climate destruction, he said. We must pass a Green New Deal. To make good on those pledges, Markey said Democrats have to take back control of the U.S. Senate and oust President Donald Trump in November. He is the most corrupt, most racist, most incompetent president in American history, Markey said. We must banish his agenda of division and destruction into the history books. Markey also credited his win in part to support from younger voters, telling them, when they say you're too young, show up with your friends. Earlier Tuesday evening, Mayor Kennedy said that while the results weren't the ones he had hoped for, he would work for Markey's re-election. The senator's a good man. You never heard me say otherwise, Kennedy told supporters at an outdoor rally. Kennedy also suggested that the movement of supporters the campaign pulled together would continue past the current election. We may have lost the final vote count tonight, but we built a coalition that will endure, he said. I will do this again with all of you in a heartbeat. In the waning weeks of the campaign, Kennedy leaned into his family's long political legacy in Massachusetts. His pedigree includes former President John F. Kennedy, former U.S. Senator and U.S. Attorney General Robert F. Kennedy, his grandfather, and former U.S. Senator Edward Kennedy, who held a seat in Massachusetts for nearly half a century until his death in 2009. Markey countered by leaning into his own family story, growing up in the working-class city of Malden with a father who drove a truck for the Hood Milk Company. In one campaign video, Markey also paraphrased the famous JFK quote, saying, "We asked what we could do for our country, we went out, we did it. With all due respect, it's time to start asking what your country can do for you." Markey found himself on the defense at times during the campaign, with Kennedy repeatedly trying to portray him as having a tenure to racial equity concerns. Kennedy faulted Markey for his initial opposition to the effort to desegregate the Boston public schools beginning in the 1970s. Markey countered by noting that he changed his views on the contentious issue that tore at the fabric of the city. He also said he supported the creation in 1973 of a state Senate seat aimed at helping elect a black senator to the Massachusetts legislature. Kennedy also repeatedly pointed to the father of Dan Roy, DJ Henry, a young black man from Massachusetts killed by police 10 years ago. Henry's father has criticized Markey, saying he failed to help the family seek justice. Markey said he has apologized to the Henry family and signed a letter seeking a federal Justice Department investigation into the killing. Markey also wasn't shy about talking about the Kennedy family, at one point pressing Kennedy to tell his father, former U.S. Representative Joe Kennedy II, to stop supporting a political action committee that was running ads against Markey. I'm sure your father is watching right now, Markey said. Tell your father right now that you don't want money to go to a super PAC that runs negative ads. Kennedy said he had no idea if his father was helping fund the PAC. Late in the race, Kennedy landed a major endorsement when Democrat House Speaker Nancy Pelosi formally backed his candidacy, while Markey, who has served with Pelosi in the House for decades, congratulated Kennedy. Pelosi's decision angered some of Markey's younger progressive supporters. Markey had earlier won the endorsement of Ocasio-Cortez and fellow Massachusetts Democrat U.S. Senator Elizabeth Warren. Ed Markey wasn't afraid. He offered his expertise and partnership. He wasn't afraid of big policy and end-use kid gloves. It's great to watch him overcome the odds and win tonight, Ocasio-Cortez tweeted Tuesday night. The coronavirus appended the way both candidates could campaign, limiting more traditional means of electioneering like knocking on doors, shaking hands, or holding big rallies. Instead, the campaigns were largely waged online with virtual rallies, virtual endorsements, virtual fundraisers, and virtual roundtable events to discuss issues. Eventually, as Massachusetts began to suppress the virus and emerge from a near lockdown, the candidates began to take their campaigns on the road with social distancing and face masks. The showdown drew criticism from Democrats nationally, who feared it would siphon time and money away from defeating President Donald Trump and winning control of the Senate. It also wasn't cheap, with both Kennedy and Markey raising and spending millions. Markey now faces a general election contest where he's considered a strong favorite against Republican primary winner Kevin O'Connor in November. It's interesting that for the first time since, for the first time in about 70 years or so, that A. Kennedy had lost a primary in Massachusetts, which is considered a Kennedy staple, a Kennedy home. I mean, with the way 2020 has been going, things are interesting, and who knows what might happen come November 3rd? Heck, who knows what might happen between now and November 3rd? But we'll be here monitoring everything. In 2016, Trump won, not only based on the votes, but also on a neat little thing called undercover journalism, and it may take place again in 2020. This is coming from Jack Cashel over at AmericanThinker.com. Says how undercover journalism turned the tide in 2016. In mid-October 2016, while in business in New York, I swung over to New Jersey to visit with my relatives. At dinner that evening, my brother, then in the early stages of TDS, that has since metastasized, pray for him, was gloating over Hillary's impending victory. I asked my brother if he were willing to bet on it. He most certainly was. He was sufficiently confident to give me 7-to-1 odds. I took it. Based on what I knew, I would have taken the bet at even money. I had inside info. Earlier in the day, I had popped up to visit James O'Keefe at the Project Veritas offices north of the city. My timing was excellent. O'Keefe was in the middle of rolling out his Rigging the Election series of undercover videos. A few days earlier, O'Keefe had released as part of his series a video recorded by the irrepressible Laura Loomer. Laura was 23 at the time. If there was a ballsier journalist/activist in America, I have not met him. Today, Loomer is a Republican candidate for Congress in Florida's 21st District. Loomer caught Andrew Shulkin, a Democrat on New York's Board of Education, or rather Board of Elections, in a moment of rare candor. I think there's a lot of voter fraud, admitted Shulkin. People don't realize, certain neighborhoods in particular, they buzz people around to vote. When Loomer asked him to identify the neighborhoods, Shulkin specified Black, Hispanic, and Chinese. This was not a lead the major media was prepared to build up on or follow up on. The New York Daily News attacked Project Veritas. The New York Times did its best to ignore it. O'Keefe's next bombshell was harder to ignore. A Project Veritas reporter has been posing as a young Democrat organizer named quote-unquote Steve in Wisconsin and gained the trust of higher-ups, most notably Scott Fovall. Fovall was then deputy director of People for the American Way, an outfit founded by TV producer Norman Lear and funded by George Soros, among others. Like many campaign strategists, Fovall loved to boast. He began by sharing with Steve the many ways in which Democrats move people around in order to affect the outcome of an election. As though speaking to imagined Republican, Fovall claimed, well, you know what, we've been busting people in to deal with you blankety blankers for 50 years, and we're not going to stop now. Wolf thought is old news, but Fovall moved into new territory, a phenomenon he called bird dogging. Remember the Iowa State Fair thing where Scott Walker grabbed the sign out of the dude's hand? Then the dude kind of gets roughed up in front of the stage right there on camera, Fovall asked Steve. We train our people and I work with a network of groups, explains Fovall. We train them up to get themselves into a situation on tape on camera that we can use later. Unwittingly, Fovall was committing to video the way that the Democrat operatives were using their own people to foment violence at Trump rallies, for which Trump people were inevitably blamed. I'm saying we have mentally ill people that pay to do crap. Make no mistake, Fovall continued. Over the last 20 years, I've paid a few homeless guys to do crazy stuff, and I've also had them for dinner, and I've also made sure they had a hotel and a shower, and I put them in a program. Like I have done that. But the reality is a lot of people, especially our union guys, a lot of union guys, they'll do whatever you want. They're rock and roll. Fovall conveniently laid out the hierarchy of the bird dogging network. The Clinton campaign pays DNC, he told Steve. DNC pays Democracy Partners. Democracy Partners pays the Fovall Group. The Fovall Group goes and executes the crap on the ground. Fovall reported directly to Bob Creamer at Democracy Partners. Bob Creamer is diabolical, said Fovall, and I love him for it. I have learned so much from that man over the last 20 years I can't even tell you. Bob Creamer, the husband of a Chicago area congresswoman, had already served time for bank fraud, a useful credential for running the dirty tricks campaign against Donald Trump. According to White House visitor logs, Creamer had made more than 340 trips to the White House while Obama was president, occasionally with Obama president at the meeting. Fovall described Creamer as the black hat to his white hat. O'Keefe sat on a Fovall video for months. In the interim, through a clever and involved strategy, he and his Project Veritas team succeeded in getting a 21-year-old reporter, Angela, an internship at Democracy Partners. Creamer took a shine to Angela, bringing her to the DNC offices and even inviting her to the White House, which opportunity she ducked lest she gets busted for entering under a false identity. Creamer shared some of the secrets of bird dogging with his new intern. He explained that dreamers were some of their most effective troublemakers. They're just froze at this, said Creamer. When Angela asked for clarification, Creamer explained, dreamers are the category of people brought here as children, as immigrants. He singled out one particular individual whose crew is spectacular at it. For the record, these foes were in the country illegally. That did not seem to bother Creamer. So Hillary is aware of all of the work you guys do, I hope? Angela asked. Oh, yes, said Creamer. Yes, the campaign is fully on it. When I headed back to New Jersey that day, I knew that all this and more was about to hit the news, and it hit powerfully enough to shift the momentum. During the final Las Vegas debate, Trump did not hesitate to bring up the dirty tricks campaign Hillary and her people had orchestrated. As I relate in my new book, Unmasking Obama, O'Keefe, Loomer, and scores of other irregular journalists did the investigative work the major media refused to during the Obama years. Their efforts ultimately paved the way for Trump's victory. Let me conclude with a tip. If you're taking a book on 2020, factor in some more good dough from Project Veritas. Now, okay. I bring this article up because my page is called Rick Bulow New Media. And you can follow it, and I'll have the link in the comment. I'll have the link in the description below for that. Now, I take that from a very familiar quote by one Andrew Breitbart, which I have right here, and will play for you.
What did they do? Rep. Andre Carson said that I was confronted by 15 different people who said the N-word 15 times in a sea of new media. Everybody put your cameras up in the air. Everybody put your cameras up in the air. Put your cell phones up in the air. Everyone put your cell phone.
Now take a look at that crowd holding up their cell phones and digital cameras and other things. That, my friend, is the type of media that's happening today that the mainstream media just doesn't understand. And they don't want to understand it. Why? I don't know, but they just don't.
And your Blackberries up in the air. We have a sea of new media here to capture the lies. Look at that, mainstream media, you bullshit artists. You hateful bastards. How dare you impugn these people's reputation? Even if there was one person, the ease with which you used it to ruin the...
One thing that I liked about Andrew Breitbart, and I still do like him, is even though he died in 2012, may he rest in peace, is his enthusiasm, his fire, and his just going right for the throat of the media. I mean, it's just amazing. I always say, in a world of Saul Alinsky's, be an Andrew Breitbart. Saul Alinsky is the author of Rules for Radicals. Most of the things that you see some of the campaigns and even some of the other organizations use pretty much come from when Saul Alinsky. Let's play this video out some more.
The whole, it's despicable. The new media is taking over where the old media failed. Yes, they failed, my friends. Yes, they failed.
We completely have them backtracking.
Yes, that's right. The new media is taking over where the old media failed. And I mean, Andrew Breitbart had talked about this in his book, which I highly recommend, by the way, called Righteous Indignation. And right at the very end of his book, he had put out a very interesting comment, which I will read in the hardcover. In the hardback copy, it's pages 231 and 232, where it says that 2011 he wrote this. He had written this book around about 20, hold on a minute. He wrote this book in 2011, and he said that 2011 is going to be less about holding Pelosi and Reid accountable than it is about holding Joseph Novelist, Andrew Morris, ABC News, and the rest of the mainstream media accountable. And it's going to holding the president of NPR, George Soros, and Media Matters, Ariana Huffington, Christiana Amanpour, Contessa Brewer, Katie Couric, and Pinch Sulzberger accountable as well. And he said that this is a cultural battle, and while they cling to their media guns and their politically correct reason, truth will be our weapon. It's a long war, I know. I've lost friends. I have the scars. My wife married an almost inappropriately, always lighthearted guy 14 years ago. Now she wakes up next to a firebrand who is one of the most polarizing figures in the country. But I've also met the America that was rendered silent by the media and is now shaking itself to life again. These are the years that we will look back on and question whether we did enough for our country and for our children. That's why I'm so determined, so pissed, so rightful, so righteously indignant. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have to save the world. That is some wise words from Andrew Breitbart, and yes, it is indeed a war. And let me just end with this short video clip that Andrew Breitbart sums up very well.
All the people that have gone out there against the mainstream media and said, you're going to call us racist, you're going to call us potential Timothy McVeighs, fuck you. War.
Yes, this is indeed a war, my friends. You know, some people say it's a spiritual war, it's a political war, it's also a cultural war. And let's do all we can to defend our great republic. The 2016 election will come down to who wins the battleground states. Florida, Virginia, Ohio, Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin, among others. Who has the advantage? Let's see what the Washington Times has to say. This article is entitled, Trump Takes Fight to Battlegrounds as the Electoral Map Comes into Focus. President Trump bought $5 million in federal aid to an airport runway in Pennsylvania on Thursday, plus nearly $50 million this week to fight street violence in Wisconsin, and the designation of a North Carolina town as a World War II heritage city, as he and Democrat presidential nominee Joseph R. Biden narrow their campaigns to a baker's dozen of battleground states that will decide the election. In addition to using the advantages of incumbency, Mr. Trump's campaign advisors say his travel schedule for the week following the Republican National Convention shows in large part where the fall campaign will be fought. Much of the battle will take place in the upper Midwest states of Minnesota and Wisconsin, in the Rust Belt states of Michigan, Ohio, and Pennsylvania, even in the relatively small electoral vote prizes of New Hampshire and Maine. Add to those battlegrounds Florida, Georgia, North Carolina, Arizona, Iowa, and Nevada, and that's the 2020 map for the final 2 months of the campaign. In Pennsylvania, Mr. Trump has narrowed the gap with Mr. Biden in public polls to less than 4 percentage points. In July, the Democrat held a double-digit lead. 2 days before the president's arrival in Latrobe, the administration announced that the regional airport will receive $5.2 million to complete a runway extension. The president told throngs of supporters at an airport rally that, quote-unquote, fake polls show Mr. Biden leading. We have the real numbers. We're leading everywhere, Mr. Trump said. I think we're way ahead of what we were 4 years ago. He hammered again his theme of restoring law and order nationwide, saying Mr. Biden wants to surrender your nation to the radical left-wing mob. Westmoreland County, the land of golfing legend Arnold Palmer and Rolling Rock Bear, is important to the president's prospects in the state. In 2016, Mr. Trump defeated Hillary Clinton there by a whopping 63.5% to 32.5%. Mr. Trump performed 8% better there than Republican Mitt Romney did in 2012. The county is also the site of the Trump House, a stars and stripes covered home owned by Leslie Rossi, who was a delegate to the RNC this year. The house on Route 982 is a political tourist attraction, featuring a 20-foot tall cutout of the president. I think we needed a people president, and we got one, Mrs. Rossi said recently on WBUR radio. He was a great president for the 4 years we've had him, and we're going to get him in there again, no problem. Referring to the president's trip, Mr. Biden said voters almost certainly won't hear him take responsibility for the economic hardship his presidency has caused Pennsylvanians. Mr. Trump's mishandling of the economy and the coronavirus pandemic has caused millions of people across the Commonwealth to file for unemployment since March, has led to a staggering unemployment rate of over 13% in Westmoreland County, and caused nearly 8,000 Pennsylvanians to lose their lives from the virus, he said in a statement. Now, while the president was energizing his base in Pennsylvania, Vice President Mike Pence was making appeals Thursday to pro-life conservatives and religious voters in Raleigh, North Carolina. He visited Gateway Women's Care, a pregnancy and health center that opposes abortion. Mr. Pence said life is winning in America, largely because of the compassion of places like Gateway Women's Care. More young people are embracing a culture of life, the Vice President said. He also headlined a Cops for Trump event in Raleigh, where the Southern States Police Benevolent Association endorsed the Trump-Pence ticket for re-election. The police organization represents about 60,000 law enforcement officers. The vice president said Mr. Biden would double down on the policies that have led to violence in American cities. Mr. Trump's advisors believe that if the president holds on to Florida, North Carolina, and Arizona, states he won in 2016, that Mr. Biden would need to win Pennsylvania, Minnesota, Wisconsin, and Michigan to win the election. If Mr. Trump wins just one of those four, his campaign strategists say, he'll win a second term. They have to go 4 for 4 in those states, something we just don't think is going to happen, said Trump campaign senior advisor Jason Miller. As of Thursday, Mr. Biden was indeed leading narrowly in all 4 of those states in the Real Clear Politics averages of public polling. The Democrat was up by 5.3 percentage points in Minnesota, up 4 points in Wisconsin, and up 2.6 points in Michigan. The Democrat was also leading in Florida, Arizona, and North Carolina, where the race is essentially a tie. The state that Mr. Trump needs to keep in his column. Fox News state polls on Wednesday found Mr. Biden leading in Arizona by 9 points, in North Carolina by 4, and in Wisconsin by 8 points. Now, during a visit to Wilmington, North Carolina on Wednesday, Mr. Trump referred to a recent poll showing him 2 points ahead in the state, but I think it's probably 10, the president said. He predicted he will win North Carolina, Florida, Georgia, and New Hampshire, and spoke about encouraging polling in Minnesota, which hasn't voted for a Republican for president since 1972. Trump campaign manager Bill Stepien said it was telling that Mr. Biden has selected Minnesota as one of the first 4 states he'll visit in the wake of the GOP convention. The last time a Republican won Minnesota was the first election of Joe Biden for the Senate, Mr. Stepien said. The fact that Biden is spending one of his first above-ground excursions traveling to Minnesota tells you the defense he's playing. It shows how the president changed the map, and more than anything, it shows how Joe Biden and the Democrats' radical policies just aren't playing in the Midwest like they used to. The president also holds an uncomfortably slim lead in Texas, and while the president's campaign team expresses confidence that he'll win the state again, the campaign launched a bus tour headed by Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick on Thursday to show up support in the I-35 corridor from San Antonio to Dallas. 4 years ago, Mr. Trump lost 21 counties in the region of the state that has turned increasingly to Democrats. Now, despite the president trailing in public polls, former White House Counselor Kellyanne Conway said there are more hidden Trump supporters who don't show up in polls but will vote for him in November. As the person who coined the term hidden undercover Trump voter in 2016, there are even more of them, and they're even more committed now, and they're going to surprise you as to who they are this time, Mrs. Conway said in an interview with Showtime's The Circus. She referred to a poll showing that 62% of Americans said they are afraid to show their political beliefs, a view expressed mostly by conservatives. But they express themselves at the ballot box, she said. Now, interestingly enough, Trump won with 306 electoral college votes back in 2016. Would it be close? I don't know. I mean, anything can happen. To paraphrase a famous quote by Norm Peterson on Cheers, played exquisitely by George Wendt, it's a dog-eat-dog world and I'm wearing milk-bone underwear. So, I mean, we have exactly 2 months until election day. So who knows what'll happen? But keep it here for your news. And that's going to do it for the news for this week. I am Mick Bulow. Again, if you like what you watch, please go ahead and hit the thumbs up button. Also subscribe and tell your friends, tell your neighbors, tell an enemy or two even. And I will be back next week. Until next time, peace.